Hello, my name is Toni Aubynn, the Chief Executive of the Minerals Commission. For most of the viewers who know me, you might have known me from the Chamber of Mines, where I was also the Chief Executive over there. I'd had some experience with tallow oil and then Goldfields Ghana. So obviously I've spent some time with the extractive industries. But throughout these times I've been bothered by a few questions. For example, why is Johannesburg and Obuasi so different, given that their gold deposits were found almost at the same time? I think I could say the same thing about Johannesburg and Takwa. Why do we say that we have a lot of minerals in this country, yet we are poor? Is it the case that we are exaggerating the number of minerals we have, or it is just that we haven't managed our minerals very well? I have a take on these issues and many more. But my take is that, first of all, we probably seem to be comparing apples with cassava when we compare Johannesburg and Obuasi or Johannesburg and Takwa. Again, the level of minerals that we have mined commercially, if you look at the amount, the types of minerals we have mined commercially historically, maybe we may be exaggerating a little bit because we have concentrated more on gold, diamond, bauxite, and manganese. So we have only 4 minerals. And I understand that 95% of the value of our minerals actually comes from one mineral, which is gold, which means that as a country, we are probably a monomineral economy. Are we a monomineral economy? But I'll take a short break. When I come back, I'm going to have some industry expert help me fulfill my take on this matter. So we take a break, and when we come back, I'll introduce my guest to you. Welcome back to Toni Aubynn's Take. And we are discussing what the impact of our mineral extraction has been for us as a country. I told you I had some guests to help me discuss this, experts indeed. On my extreme left, that is to your extreme right, is Mr. Jerry Ahaji. Jerry is the principal officer in charge of policies at the Minerals Commission. So, I mean, we're going to be hearing from the Minerals Commission's point of view. And sitting very close to me is a guest who has flown far away from South Africa to this place for this program. Mr. David Noko. He is the Executive Vice President for Global Operations, Global Sustainability for Anglo Gold Ashanti. So they are going to help me to discuss that. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Now, I'll go straight to the point. How is the mining industry doing generally? I think I will take it from David.
First of all, I need to put context in this discussion around how is the mining industry doing. The starting point is that mining is cyclical by nature. You do have booms, and you do have lows in commodities in general. And currently, in the last 2 years to today, we're in low times. Mining industry has reached the top end of the boom, and we are in the low end of the cycle at this point. But overall, we remain very optimistic because we know that demand for commodities and demand for minerals will continue to grow into the future.
But David, still on you. You would agree with me that the U.S. economy is doing well, and the demand by China and India for gold is also depressing a little bit. So how could you be positive on this?
I'm very positive because clearly, if you look at a trend and you look backwards to 20, 30 years, the trend has always been upward with a cycle trending down and trending up at the same time. The other point I must make is that economy is growing globally. There is growth in wealth, and more so there's growth in consumption because there is a relationship between consumption, which is a factor of the population growth that happens globally in the world. So I'm pretty optimistic that there will be an upturn soon.
Jerry, how is this affecting Ghana? How is the lull in the gold price impacting Ghana?
Yeah, I I'll say that in your introduction, you did indicate, that uh, gold exports account for close to 95%, of total mineral exports. And so a decline in the price of gold, obviously has a negative, impact on government revenues, employment, etc. Taking it from David, the decline, from 2013 has been about 500 US dollars, because in January 2013, gold price on average was about 1,700 US dollars per an ounce. Last year, as of December 2014, it came down on average of about 1,002, so 500 decline, which is extremely significant. Coming back to the impact on Ghana, for instance, in 2012, government revenues from gold or from the mineral sector, accounted for 28%. That's the domestic tax.
Which was the number one contributor, so to speak, to
Exactly.
the domestic
Exactly. And that was about 1.4 billion Ghana cedis. Now in 2013, because of the decline in the price of gold, the government revenues declined to 19%. And so obviously, you see
that's
that
a huge gap from 28 to 19.
28 to 19. But in terms of quantum, the 2013, accounted for 1 billion Ghana cedis, so still, you see a huge gap of about 400,000 Ghana cedis. And so, obviously, you see that it has, an impact on Ghana. Besides, the fiscal, we also have, the impact on employment, because, you see a number of the mines scaling down their operations, and the famous one, is the Anglo Gold Ashanti issue, But, in general, it's not all that bad, because, employees who are going home, on the average, people are getting over $80,000.
Well,
and so
you don't want employees' wives to be on their necks for the $80,000. So, but I have an issue about whether, as a country, we become a slave to gold. But before I come back to you on that, let me go to David with my pet question about whether there is resource nationalism going on, in recent times in Africa. And I'm asking this question because most African countries have been raising this issue that they host most of the minerals in the world, yet they see themselves getting either poorer or not getting richer. What's your take on that?
Well, it is true that Africa has lagged most of the continents in terms of development, in spite of the fact that Africa is very endowed with mineral resources. And that is a fact, that is true. And I think it has come to a stage where, because of visibility that's been heightened by technology, we see other continents on television. There is a lot of dissemination of information all over the world with speed, where Africans have become aware that they do not compare favorably with other continents and with other economies. And it is correct that Africa and Africans claim what belongs to them, and come up the scale so that livelihoods can improve, like livelihoods are in other stronger former mining economies, like whether it be the West, whether it's Scandinavia, whether it's in the Americas.
But how could we do that? How could we actually convert the natural resources into our development? How can we use these natural resources to catalyze our development?
Well, we've got to fix the fundamentals. Currently, fundamentals are not in place. I can give you at a global scale or with anecdotal information what the drivers of developments are. most economies that have developed historically in the world focused inwardly.
Yeah.
Today we talk about globalization. But
now we talk about South Korea, even
China,
America
and South Africa. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not proposing by any means that we close economies,
yes.
but I'm proposing that ownership of such the ownership of capital, the ownership of entities that produce these minerals must begin to be owned in an equitable way, in a fair way, by residents of countries, so that the residents of countries normally would, by nature, invest in their own countries. So there is the question of capital taking a flight, minerals taking a flight, expatriation of capital will always render the source country poor.
So the point
that reverses.
The point you are making is that we should keep capital in-house.
Yeah.
We should sort of try and keep minerals relatively in-house, and the earnings on capital in-house.
Well, you got to trade.
Yeah.
With globalization, you must trade with the world. What I'm saying is the focus must be, you need to keep capital in-house.
Okay.
Importation of capital is far better for the country than exportation of capital. If you can't do that, you got a balance. You need a balance. You need circulation of that capital inside the country with many rotations then before you can export it. Then in that way you have a chance. The current practices where you export capital on a consistent basis. Let me give you just two examples. One, you buy materials in to your country, and then capital leaves your country. That makes the country poorer and poorer.
No, you are right, because most of these mineral-rich countries that claim to have benefited from mining, you see that most of the inputs are actually manufactured within the same country. Yeah. You take Australia.
Yes.
They are net exporter of input to mining. South Africa is the same. So I totally agree with you. Yeah. But let me go to Jerry. Jerry, in 2012, I think the government of Ghana came up with a raft of policies that appeared to be seeking a bit more from the mining industry, to the country. Yeah. For example, I think corporate tax rose from 25% to 35%. Capital allowance had to be, remechanized in a way that there was a significant reduction in the time space. There were a few other policies, and also there was some attempt to even introduce windfall profit tax. Would you consider these as an attempt to sort of nationalize our resources? I know that resource nationalism is not so much about taking over and controlling, but finding a way, ways and means of getting more from the operators of these mines. Yeah. Would you consider that as an attempt like that?
I won't consider it that way. The policies, by government, is just aimed at also getting, a fair share, of the resource. Because in the past, if you go back to the 80s, you see that when gold price was about $250 an ounce, then in the early 90s, 2000, we've seen a steady climbing, of the gold price. So what government was just aiming at is also just to get, a fair share of the cake, because if the price, goes up steep, which in 2011 it's even got to about 1,900, which is historic. And if we don't really have a scheme in terms of the fiscal regime, which would automatically adjust, the benefits to government, then it means that periodically government must come out with some.
So government was looking for a win-win situation.
For a win-win situation.
Now we're going to have to take a break now, but when we come back, I will bring back another pet question. That is why the Takwa ore body, gold ore body, was discovered just at the same time as the Witwatersrand gold ore body in South Africa. I think it was almost at the same time that Obuasi also started mining, and we've been doing that for over 100 years. When you go to Johannesburg, you see a huge difference. Infrastructure, you see what mining can do. When you go to Takwa and Obuasi, it is not the same. I want us to address this. I want us to, educate viewers on why this situation exists. But you're watching Toni Aubynn's Take. We take a break now. Welcome back, viewers. You've been watching Toni Aubynn's Take. And we have been discussing Ghana's extractive industry and how far we have fared. Toni Aubynn is the Minerals Commission's CEO. Previously, the CEO of the Chamber of Mines, also worked with Talo as the Director of Corporate Affairs and Goldfields as the Director of Corporate Affairs and Social Development. I have some experts to help me discuss my own take. On my extreme left is Mr. Jerry Ahaji from the Minerals Commission. He's the principal officer in charge of policies. And then closer to me here is a gentleman who has flown all the way from South Africa to be here, David Noko. He is the Executive Vice President for Global Sustainability for Anglo-Gold Ashanti. So the whole Anglo-Gold Ashanti staple, he is the global chargé d'affaires of sustainability. You are welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Now, let's go back to this question of why Johannesburg is not the same as Takwa or Obuasi, or maybe why Obuasi is not the same as Johannesburg. But let me remind viewers that this is only part one of our discussion. So we will have the next discussion later on. David, you just come from Johannesburg, so you might tell us why.
I think, first of all, it's a question of capital retention in a town, which actually produces the resource. But I think let's put it in context. The gold production in the Witwatersrand in South Africa, in Johannesburg, in terms of multiples, was more than 20 times at its peak if one compares to what was produced at peak in Obuasi.
So you mean the Witwatersrand area, the Johannesburg area, was producing more than 20 times in terms of volume of gold than Obuasi has been producing,
Certainly.
Right? Okay.
Yes, and therefore that in terms of financial quantums, you wouldn't compare. You wouldn't expect a Johannesburg out of Obuasi because the volume of production, and hence the proceeds in terms of cash generated for distribution amongst the people, amongst business, and the town itself would not compare one for one.
Yeah, but just still on this subject, would you say that Johannesburg's development have been largely due to the activities of the companies themselves, or is there any planning organization that have been responsible for bringing into being the kind of development we see in Johannesburg?
Of course, the fact remains that the basics must be correct. One is that the business was committed to developing the country and the city of Johannesburg. At the same time, good policies were in place, and thankfully at the time South Africa was a closed economy again. So the question of exportation of capital comes into play. So capital had to be invested within the country from the profits that are made from the gold. So that is the crux of this question, and I think one has to put to bed this debate by making sure that the base drivers for economic growth and the growth of cities is understood.
My take on this has been that we've been comparing apples with cassava because they really are very different situations. Yes. But Jerry, let me come to you. Is it the case that we have had a policy failure, that we haven't really thought through the issue of how to use the mineral benefits that have been generated from mining in these areas, or it is just that the mining companies have not developed those regions?
Thank you. Let me approach it from two angles. The first angle being conscious planning by government to develop a particular area. As I said, I mean, for South Africa, I mean, it's a multi-mineral economy. I mean, in terms of exports, gold, platinum, coal, etc. So revenues that are derived, from the mining sector are huge as compared to Ghana. But even if we get a fraction, let me say 1/10 of what South Africa gets, at least, if there is a conscious effort to develop Obuasi or Takwa, we would have been able to do that.
So you will put the issue at conscious effort at planning?
Yes, at planning.
Okay.
So if there was a conscious planning to build maybe 1,000-bed hospital in Obuasi, first-class roads, pipe-borne water, etc., we would have been able to do it.
And the one thing that I've also seen in my practice as a mining industry player is that always the expectation is that, especially when it comes to social development, the expectation is that the mining companies will do it. Mining companies will do it. There must be corporate social responsibility, which I definitely agree. But I have always said, in this modern time, corporate social responsibility alone, in the way we practice it, is not going to do much. So I think now it means that for us as a country, we should think of how to use the benefit of mining to develop.
Exactly.
And then, I don't know, somebody was telling me about the history of ownership of the Obuasi mine, for example. For several years, it was foreign owned, actually, 100% owned by a foreign company for a very long time, even before independence. And even after independence, it was until Achampon's regime when Ghana had a significant stake in the mine. So, I mean, this ties in with David's point that the capital flies, the gold also flies, and therefore not much came back to develop the place. Viewers, you are watching Toni Aubynn's take on the extractive industry in Ghana.
But let me just add on. My second point was the leakages against linkages. Because we import,
I like that. I like the leakages against
linkages. Because we import virtually, all the mining inputs from abroad. It means that, the forex is leaking out. And within, we've not been able to develop the linkages in such a way that if all this, local content, mining inputs are produced here, then it means capital that, we'll use to import all these mining inputs will stay in the country. So capital flight, is also part of the.
So you think as a country, what should you do? What are we doing wrong?
So in fact, going forward, there's a need, as the Africa Mining Vision, captures, that there's a need for a structural transformation, of mineral-dependent economies in such a way that mining inputs should, there should be conscious planning in such a way that mining inputs should be produced locally and its linkage with the other sectors of the economy. Until we are able to do that, then it will be very difficult for us.
David, let me come back to you. And I want to sort of paint your mind on the issue of mining and industrialization. Ideally, mining must be the basis of industrialization, historically. Even if you go back to the ancient times, human development actually hinged on mining. The Stone Age, the Iron Age, and all the ages that were linked to minerals. So when we say mining's contribution, are we looking at just the contribution from the mine sites, from the operations, or how should we look at that?
I like the concept of talking about the linkage upstream and downstream. So your supply into mining has to be properly accounted into being mining activity. So and your deliveries upfront after mining, also those minerals must be appreciated to a point where, as far as possible, they are sellable, which is your value-adding process. Because to produce and sell a raw material does not benefit a country that much, when actually within gold, the country should be aiming at producing jewelry, not gold itself. Gold is a raw material. So, and mining is a primary industry. And we must agree that the fact that we have not utilized our endowment profitably for the benefit of the nation, that in itself is an indictment. The fact remains that we are endowed with wealth. If one compares countries like Ghana to Scandinavian countries, how come Scandinavian countries, who were mining countries by nature, have become so wealthy today? It's because they had a plan, they had a sense of nationalism, and they contained their wealth within their own countries. They allowed very little of capital flight out of those countries.
By the way, I lived in 2 of the Scandinavian countries, Norway and Finland, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Then let me give you an outside example of how countries that have a plan and commitment to develop can utilize the cheapest of their resources. Singapore. Singapore have realized that being surrounded by oceans is actually an endowment in itself. And today they've built one of the largest and leading ports in the world.
Yeah.
So
and Japan.
And they've become
Japan
a very
as well.
force, and Japan. So these things are possible. I think what we as Africans have to ask ourselves is that when are we ever going to wake up to reality? And that's really the challenge we've got to throw at ourselves.
Well, that's right. You're watching Toni Aubynn's Take, and really as Africans, when are we going to wake up to reality? Jerry, I'll come back to you. But we'll take a short break here, and remember that this is only part 1 of Toni Aubynn's Take. We'll take a short break. When we come back, you will explain to me, as an expert from the Minerals Commission, whether we know our mineral endowments as a country. You're welcome back to Toni Aubynn's Take, and we have been discussing Ghana's extractive industry, how far we've fared, and helping me to discuss that has been Jeria Haji of the Minerals Commission and Mr. David Noko of Anglo Gold Ashanti, the global office in Johannesburg. Look, before we went on break, I was asking whether, as a country, we know the portfolio of our mineral, the endowment, the level of endowment, and whether we have plans to actually grow this endowment.
Thank you. To answer the question straightforward, I would say partly. In a sense that the whole of Africa is underexplored geologically. But we have some work, done in the past, which has given us indications of what we have as a country. In terms of bauxite deposits, we know of Kibi and Yinahin. These are our major bauxite deposits in the country. Kibi has been estimated for about 180 million metric tons. Yinahin has 350 to about 700 million metric tons. In terms of gold, it's a little bit difficult. The geological survey, what it does is regional mapping. And so most companies that come into the country acquire concessions to conduct further exploration to prove these resources and reserves.
But we seem to be seeing gold all the time, finding gold all the time. When I was a kid, gold was only confined to the Takwa area and Obuasi area. Now you go to the north, there's gold. You go to everywhere, there's gold. Even in my village, there's gold.
Yes, I agree with you. And so the question is, have we been able to, explore and quantified, these resources that if an investor comes into the country, we'll be able to give the investor a block to say that Ghana has 1 million ounces here. And so maybe we could sit and design a fiscal regime under win-win circumstances. No, we don't.
Okay. Do you think we should do that?
Mineral exploration itself is risky. And so capital that, is advanced towards that is, globally termed as risk capital. And so there could be a PPP.
Okay.
Normally, government, is done in Botswana, Botswana, yes, etc. Government could conduct exploration up to a point. And then when the private sector comes in, they take it over and government could have a significant share in the mining operation. But overall, I would say that we know our mineral resource partly. We don't have the full picture of what we have because, capital is very expensive and it's risky, more so when it's going into
Boris Yeltsin, remember Boris Yeltsin, the former, I think the late Russian president, he said, if you don't take risk, you don't drink champagne.
Yeah.
So if you want to drink champagne, you must take some risk. So I think maybe as a country, we must be prepared to take risk on our own a little bit, more than relying on companies to do that. And sometimes the companies may not give you the kind of information you require. So I'm sure we need to look at the risk and be prepared to do that. Is there anything we can learn from South Africa? Do you have some knowledge of your level of endowment?
We do. Of course, we don't know what we don't know. But we have done.
So, the known endowment.
Yes, yes, we do. Hence, it's important to quantify what your endowment is, because that determines the wealth of the country for future generations. So, South Africa is extensively explored. However, there's still potential to explore further. I think with technology, because there are two ways of doing exploration. You do a simple geographical coverage, and the other one is you got to go deep.
Yeah.
So instruments are required to look deeper into the ground to see what has yet to be discovered. I want to mention something pretty interesting, that in South Africa and Namibia, actually, diamonds are being mined from the coastal seas from the shores of that. So there was exploration at sea for mineral, and discoveries were made. And today, there's 1 million carats of diamond was mined in a year on the shores of Namibia. So there is scope, and it's got to be explored, and data and information actually stack up the balance sheet of a country. And therefore, once you have a strong balance sheet, you can your ability to borrow capital,
absolutely,
and to raise capital is very high.
So that you know your wealth,
exactly.
The wealth, the mineral wealth of the country,
Yes.
and I'm sure once you have that knowledge, you can even demarcate minerals, some of which are strategic minerals.
Exactly.
You can have a bargaining chip with the minerals and say, look, as for this type of mineral or the location of this type of mineral, you can only mine at the following, interchange, at the foreign exchange.
Exactly.
I'm talking about at the foreign price.
Yes.
It's not like you can just go and mine and all that. So I think, look, you're watching Toni Aubynn's Take. I think we are just getting to the end of our conversation for part one. But before we do so, I want to ask a very, maybe difficult question. Are we depleting our minerals? Are we depleting our minerals? Are our minerals being depleted? Ghana first.
Ghana, yeah. Minerals, by nature are depletable assets. I will not say we are depleting them, but the known reserves are declining. In fact, what we don't know.
We don't know.
Yes, we don't know.
Yeah.
But the known ones that have been quantified into reserves and resources, those are declining by the year. Because if we produce on the average of 1.4 million ounces of gold per annum, then it means that year on year we are subtracting 1.4 million ounces out of the known.
Means if you take an ounce out of the
Yes.
gold known deposit,
deposit,
it's less by 1 ounce.
Yes.
it's less. That is it. So the known ones, yes, are declining by the day because we cannot grow it, and it can only.
But
be
are we
mined
finding
by
more?
mining responsibly.
Are we finding more?
Yes, indeed, we are finding more because private companies operating in the country. If you look at the reserve sheets at the end of the year, you see that year on year there is a growth.
David?
Well, I'll make 2 points. One is that until we find another planet, we're depleting our minerals.
What, planet X or planet Y?
Yes,
So
Right.
that for me is a fact. And then there's a second economic one, and is that, of course, we're talking about net depletions on known reserves and resources. You would say, what do I know? What do I put in terms of new resources and reserves in terms of your incremental improvements of your confidence of your endowment with time, and what do I take out? So that from an economic and business approach, that's how we talk about depletion. But where I sit, as long as we are not growing our planet, as long as we have not found another planet where humans can go and live and start to do exploration, we are depleting our resources.
Yeah.
Viewers, you have been watching Toni Aubynn's Take, and we have been discussing the Ghana's extractive industry. And actually, I've brought in that beyond Ghana because South Africa has been in all the time. We have been helped in this discussion by Jerry Ahaji of the Minerals Commission and David Noko of Anglo Gold Ashanti, the global office. That has been my take. This is just part one of our discussions. Next week, we are going to continue with the discussions with another set of experts in this field, and a lot of questions to be asked, a lot of answers to be given. But thank you very much for watching, and see you next week.